Welcome to the latest episode of The Independent. I'm Pete Sampson, joined as always by my co-host Matt Fortuna. And Matt, the calendar has moved to fall. The forecast has moved to fall. And depending on this weekend, I feel like the summer unchecked optimism around Notre Dame football is very much hangs in the balance at this point. I think that we and I'm waving my hands if you're watching us on YouTube, like the media in general, like we often are like overselling like a huge game or like this is make or break or, everything's like, but I do feel like as it relates to Notre Dame football and its relationship to expectations and the fan base, like there's a lot on the line this weekend when Louisville visits Notre Dame Stadium.
Am I being over dramatic to say, and it's a young career, we can say this again later in the season if things go according to plan, but am I being over dramatic to say this is the biggest game of Marcus Freeman's coaching career?
Yes. Because I think that he's, what would have happened if he had lost to Cal or, the Clemson win or the USC win, Ohio State last year. Like, I think he's had a lot of like biggest games of his coaching career, but I do think this is a huge game. And I think that the reason that it's huge is like the fan base, I think, is on edge with the head coach in a way that they have not been before. And that is something that's very difficult to come back from. When you lose the fan base, and I'm not saying that would happen with a loss, but it would happen with a section of the fan base, and it's tough to sort of reverse those trends.
Well, that's the games you just mentioned, right? Cal obviously would have been awful if they lost, but it was his first season. The Ohio State game, they did lose. The Louisville game last year, I thought we might be turning the corner to the discussion you just had, especially with the then undefeated USC coming to town. And that team rallied and the program rallied and the fans stormed the field and chanted his name. And it was like, all right, like maybe this guy does know what he's doing. And the fans certainly want him to succeed, right? Like Brian Kelly or a million other coaches in that situation, I don't think get a field storming and their names chanted if we beat USC under those circumstances last year. Now, everything was built toward this season. There's a whole year 3 stigma with Notre Dame head coaches. You win the way you do week 1 A&M, and I don't care how A&M fares the rest of the year, whether they're a great team or a bad team. Like that was still a very big, important win for Notre Dame football as a program. If you're eliminated from playoff contention before October, before your first bye, make no mistake, they're out if they lose this game. Then I just think you open the doors to all sorts of questions and all sorts of storylines you do not need or want the rest of this season. Like there's no other games on this schedule outside of USC that the layman would get excited for, that is going to have Notre Dame in the national conversation if they're already eliminated from playoff contention. This was a playoff or bust year. This was a playoff run or bust year, in my opinion.
I agree.
And you see that go up in flames before October with the bye week, which gives everyone a lot of time to speculate and come up with their own storylines. I just think that's a dark, dark place that this program does not want to go to.
Yeah, and so we've got at The Athletic sort of a CFP percentageologist or, kind of like a bracketologist. I didn't want to say that, or like our Nate Silver of the CFP. So his name's Austin Mock, and I asked him yesterday because I wanted to put a number on this. I was like, in your model, and he is up front. He's like, look, I don't know how this is not like sacrosanct here. It's the first year of the 12-team playoff, and Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. Who knows how that's going to be viewed? But I said, like, give me a number in your algorithm of like Notre Dame wins their percentage of making the playoff, Notre Dame loses their percentage of making the playoff. I'll put you on the spot. What do you think their percentage of making the playoff is if they win this weekend?
40, and I'm being optimistic.
50.8%. Their percentage of making the playoff if they lose this weekend.
2.
15.6. So Yeah,
So you're saying there's a chance.
Yeah, but it's the difference between 2 and 15 is they're both in the so you're saying there's a chance realm, right? But I point that out just because like 50% is like not great considering what this season was supposed to be.
Not bad,
but it's not terrible. Like you're still there. And I think that the reason I'm hesitant to sort of go with like, oh, this is the biggest game that he's coached is if you win this one, like you really have to beat Louisville and Stanford and Georgia Tech. Navy seems a little bit frisky all of a sudden again. Like you have to be 10-1 going to USC. I think anything short of that and like how the fans feel about Notre Dame with a loss to Louisville would be the same with a loss to Stanford, would be the same with a loss to Georgia Tech, would be this certainly would be worse with the loss to Navy. But I just think that sort of every game Marcus is going to coach between now and Thanksgiving weekend is sort of that biggest game. He really just he can't afford another loss short of USC because at least at that point you could have a conversation about Notre Dame in the playoff at 10-2. I think if Notre Dame loses before then, that conversation will have ended before it started.
I agree with that. I put the focus on this game just because the buys afterward. It's the last game of the month. And yes, losing to Stanford, losing to Georgia Tech, whomever, not good. But if you're basically chopping off the last 2 months of the season before they even start, which is nationally what would happen to Notre Dame football if they lose, then it's like, okay, like what's going to happen next? Jaden Mickey just opted out. Are more players going to opt out? We just saw UNLV court. You know what I mean? Like there's just –
I'm with you.
It's just inviting 2 months of like, what the hell are we getting ourselves into?
It would be very dark. It would be a very dark – like I think that the ramifications would be similar in terms of the playoff implications and the fan sentiment. There would just be a longer runway of like, if they lost this weekend than if it was Georgia Tech or Navy or USC. So all that is true. We do, Mark Ennis came on the show from Louisville and ESPN Radio in Louisville, sort of give a rundown of the Cardinals. And I do think this is the toughest game Notre Dame will play between now and USC. So maybe there's some upside there of like, if you win it, you get more of a boost. But I just think I look at this game as this would be a quality win. Like there's like you referenced, there's not a lot of opportunities for those with the way the schedule has shaken out. But if they beat Louisville at home, that would be a really good win. I think Louisville is a contender to make the ACC championship game.
They made it last year, and they might be better this year.
Yeah, are they a favorite? No, but like they're a legit contender with Clemson and Miami to make that game.
And if you're in that game, you're in the playoff hunt till the very last minute, and maybe still in it. So
that's because I think, and maybe more than anything, Notre Dame would love to go into championship weekend with the hope that you could say we beat a conference champion.
Right.
You're not going to get that from A&M. You're not going to get that from USC.
You might.
Probably not. Like Louisville is your best chance to get it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
So that's there. There's a lot to it. I mean, Louisville is a fascinating team, and we'll get into that with Mark. But the coaching between Jeff Brohm and Marcus Freeman. Brohm has been around the block many times over. I think Mark talked about how their quarterback, Tyler Shuck, is much more of a Brohm-style quarterback than what Jack Plummer was last year, who ultimately beat Notre Dame in what felt like an out-of-body experience watching it for Plummer. But it's a fascinating game. And, like, we'll see how Notre Dame comes out mentally. I think that's Marcus Freeman has done a pretty good job of, like, having them bounce back from adversity, like a loss. And I think it still feels like the Northern Illinois loss is like the predominant result of the season. I think they're still sort of feeding off that. And then look, they lost to Louisville last year. And I almost laughed out loud during Marcus's press conference on Monday when somebody asked him if he would use the Louisville loss as fuel for this weekend. And he described it as like, it's kind of like going to therapy. And I was like, I feel like this podcast is sort of like going to therapy. But yeah, I think there's some of that too, where I talked to Rocco Spindler about it on Tuesday after Access. It's just like that game was pretty dark last year. For a game Notre Dame was, I think, winning at the beginning of the third quarter.
They were. Like, I had to go back and check that and like make sure like it wasn't a misprint, because you just
it's like
you think back to that night and you think bad thoughts.
It's the doppelganger to or the reverse to the Notre Dame-Wisconsin game, where Wisconsin was actually, I think, winning in the fourth quarter and then got absolutely destroyed by Notre Dame. So you're like, I thought that Notre Dame was winning the whole time. But
it's not been the same as a program since then.
No, they were either broken by Notre Dame or broken by Graham Mertz, one of the two, maybe both. I just sort of look at this game does feel like an inflection point for Marcus Freeman, for his relationship with the fan base, for how this team views the season. Look, no one's ever had their 12-team playoff aspirations dashed in September before, because there's never been a 12-team playoff. Like how you navigate that is totally different than everything else.
What if Notre Dame wins this game by 30 and Louisville runs through the ACC, right? Like Clemson with Georgia, like very possible.
Yeah, maybe this is, kind of a watershed moment for Marcus Freeman's career at Notre Dame, and Riley Leonard's career at Notre Dame, where it all clicks. I mean, we don't know, which is a bit of a hint for how I would describe my game prediction in segment 3 of this podcast. Like, we just don't know about this team, which is like not good, but it sure is pretty damn interesting.
A reminder, you mentioned therapy. Please subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube page as well. We are live now, as we've been every Wednesday throughout the course of the season and after every game as it happens. And if you'd like to look great on game day or at home, please buy some merch from our partners at Obvious Shirts. You can find the Independent collection at bit.ly/the Independent Podcast. Thanks for all who have ordered during our launch week this past week as well. You mentioned Tyler Shuck, 7th-year quarterback. I'm not sure we've stressed that enough. Like, Sam Hartman, 6 years felt like a lot. This guy is in his 7th year. He's 24 years old. I believe he's married. He's on his 3rd school. He went to Oregon. He went to Texas Tech. He's now at Louisville. I agree with you. I agree with Mark. He seems much more suited for a Jeff Brohm offense than what he has had so far back in the Derby City. He's yet to throw an interception through 3 games so far. The competition, however, has not been elite. Let's face it. I mean, Jeff Sagarin is kind of the godfather of scheduling rankings. You want to guess where he has Notre Dame's schedule strength to this point and Louisville's? And they're 134 FBS teams this year, I believe.
I don't know.
It doesn't matter. Well, here's a hint. That number does not matter when taking Louisville's schedule into account.
I don't know. What do you got?
Notre Dame has played the 37th toughest schedule to date. Louisville, 143rd.
Wow. So, I don't even understand the math on that one.
They opened with the FCS team. They played, I think, Jacksonville State, who used to be an FCS team not that long ago. Then they had a bye, and then they played Georgia Tech. Yeah, it's not been a great schedule. Probably why these stats are a little inflated. Now, I'm not dismissing Louisville as a good football team, but 4th in total offense, averaging better than 500 yards per game. 4th in yards per play offense, averaging 8.42 yards per play. 18th in passing offense, averaging better than 308 yards per game. And top 20 in yards per play defense, top 25 in total defense. So, yeah, I mean, they've done what they're supposed to do with the schedule they've played so far. They scored a touchdown in all 3 phases last week, offensively, defensively, and special teams against Georgia Tech, who I don't know what to think of Georgia Tech. I mean, we got high on them after that Florida State win. And it's like, oh, wait, that's kind of what everyone's going to do at Florida State this year. They lost to what I think is not a very good Syracuse team a couple weeks after that. And this is a Louisville offense that I think is going to look a little bit different from last year's. They relied on the run game a little bit more last year. They've got Ja'Cory Brooks, the Alabama transfer, number 1 in the ACC right now in receiving yards per game at 99 plus per. Seems like Louisville always has a player or two capable of wrecking a game like that. Tutu Atwell seemed that way. I believe his first career college game against Notre Dame back in 2019. So Notre Dame does have the secondary here that they haven't had in years past that should be able to keep that in front of them. And, I get into this with Mark. The over-under of this game is between 45 and 45.5, short of overtime or a special teams or defensive touchdown from either side. This game's going to look a lot more like the 12-7 game from 2020 than it will last year's game or the 2019 game, where it seemed like both offenses, at least early on, could do whatever they wanted. I just think both defenses are really good. I think Notre Dame's offense probably has the same questions we had about them entering the season. We haven't gotten any answers to them yet. I have a hard time seeing this being a high-scoring game.
I would agree with that. I think that Notre Dame's secondary is like elite, among the best, if not the best in the country. And that's, assuming that you've got Morrison, Gray, Watts, and then the Schuler-Hurd combination out there together with Jordan Clark as the nickel. It's like I had the big sort of all-access Miami story this week, and like the Miami staff were just like, that secondary is a bunch of ass kickers. Like they're Chuck Martin describing Benjamin Morrison as like, he is draped on receivers so much that you cannot even see the receiver on tape. Like he just makes them vanish. And I get it. Like Louisville is, their receivers and their quarterback are much better than what Miami put out there last weekend, but I don't think they're going to move the needle. I mean, against Al Golden's defense. I mean, they were number one in the country in pass efficiency defense last year. I believe they're top 10 now. Tyler Shuck has 8 touchdown passes, 0 picks. I have a hard time seeing him getting out of this game with, 1, 2, certainly at least 1, maybe 2. I think Notre Dame's secondary will win that matchup. And look, they need to win that matchup because I don't see Notre Dame doesn't have the shootout offense right now to go out there and just go up and down the field with somebody else.
I'm completely with you. You mentioned Chuck Martin. I don't think we've done a show since both your stories ran with him. Awesome. Everyone, if you haven't read already, check it out on The Athletic. You'll learn a lot about Notre Dame, I think, reading as well. But the one quote I got to come back to, just for entertainment's sake, the lead of your story, post-game locker room, Miami of Ohio loses to Notre Dame, and Chuck Martin tells his team, quote, "There's so much left out there. This was a hell of a challenge today, but we could have beat them. We're going to keep working. We're going to find a way to get our first victory, and we're going to sing our GD fight song next Saturday. All right, we're going to pray, and we're going to get out of here," end quote. Chuck Martin is every Catholic school coach I've ever had at every single level of every sport ever, and that's what I love about him. If you're a comedy fan, Pat McGann has a huge skit on this of a guy I know, Kenny Styler, friend of mine who was his high school coach, basically MFing his guys in the pregame huddle, saying the refs and the opposing teams are out to get us. All right, let's bow our heads and say a Hail Mary. Chuck Martin is straight out of 1985 in that regard. I love him for it.
Yeah, I mean, he was our guest last week, and I think he said like Notre Dame football is part of the Catholic religion. Like there's the intertwining there is beautiful and hilarious. They were great. A major thank you to everyone for kind of opening their doors to me last week. I learned a ton. Staff is very, very fun to deal with. And I learned a ton about Notre Dame. It's Jeremiah Love is every bit as good, in our opinion, as every other coach there. And I think they're a part, like Boubacar Traore is maybe better than what we think, and we think he's pretty good. So yeah, it was fun to sort of get a quote unquote, a professional opinion on stuff that you think. And like Robert Blanton, who's the DB's coach, asked me like during the meeting, I was like, "What do you think your football IQ is?" And I was like, I don't know, like 100 level, but like plus maybe 200 level. And he's like, whatever. But like sitting in those meetings, it really is like we really are 100 level football people. Because
you ever want to know how much you don't know about football?
Oh my God! I mean, especially sitting in a quarterback meeting, that thing blew me away. Gus Ragland's their quarterback's coach, and I was just like, I don't know what you're saying for an hour straight. And like the sort of staff meetings with watching film, like they've got like the play call, the personnel. It's, they just have their own language. We don't speak it. So that was really interesting. Like a good sort of ego check of like, yeah, maybe you don't want to talk X's and O's in a question about like, and assume you knew what was supposed to happen because you don't.
There's nothing, can I just interject here? There's nothing I hate more than the Twitter coaches who will freeze frame a play and be like, look how open this guy was.
Yeah, Raglan and I actually talked about that because I was like, yeah, I know everyone in the media loves to do their freeze frame quarterbacks. And he's like, it drives him nuts because he's like, was that part of the progression? Like, who's in the quarterback's face? How, like, was he reading man and it was zone? Was it zone and it was man? Like, there are a million things that go into just not seeing player X running wide open. So
with 11 guys breathing down your throat.
Yeah, exactly. It just, and that was part of it too with Brett Gabbert. He's got these pretty long play calls that, I mean, he knows he's fluent in it, but you got to process all that, get another 10 guys to understand it. And then you have Howard Cross and Riley Mills in your face while you're doing it. Like, good luck to you with that. That was fascinating, but yeah, I learned a ton about Notre Dame. Yeah, it's probably like the fact that, I mean, the Riley Leonard situation is as confusing to them as it is to us. So that was kind of maybe more of a confirmation than a revelation. But yeah, it was great. I really had a good time down there.
Reading that quote, I was reminded of the scene in Rudy when John Favreau is like, I'm not allowed to say GD anymore. What's a lapsed Catholic to do?
Yeah.
Chuck Martin must have missed that message from Rudy, although he was a fan long before that. But let's get to our interview with Mark Ennis. I think you guys will enjoy it. The guy is an expert on all things Louisville, knows the town well, knows the program well. He's seen a lot, and he has some great takeaways from this program, the first 3 games of the season, and a preview of what's to come at Notre Dame Stadium. So without further ado, Mark Ennis of ESPN Louisville. Pleased to be joined by Mark Ennis of ESPN Louisville. He has covered the Cardinals for a long time, knows that program inside and out. Mark, thanks for joining us. I guess my first question is, what do we really know about Louisville? It's been a 3-game schedule, only one power conference opponent. They put Georgia Tech away last weekend. What's the vibe around Jeff Brohm's team in year 2?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question, but like, what do we know about them? Especially because the Georgia Tech game was so different than the first 2 games. And when you play Austin Peay and Jacksonville State, you're trying to intuit things because directly this competition, it doesn't tell you much. And it was very different against Georgia Tech. And I think a little bit of a wake-up call in some areas. But I think in terms of strengths, the consistencies, the things we've seen all through all 3 games, they're pretty explosive through the air, which they weren't, a year ago. Instead of the big plays coming on the ground. And they've got real issues with mobile quarterbacks that they didn't have a year ago, which is bad news for facing Notre Dame and Riley Leonard. But through 3 games, that's been a consistency. An issue with them is mobile quarterbacks breaking the pocket, breaking contain, causing problems defensively, and then hitting huge plays through the air, which they didn't have a year ago. All that stuff came on the ground a year ago. They don't have those guys, but they made a big upgrade throwing the ball. And this year, I think they feel like there's a little bit more of like what Jeff likes to do with an offense, with a quarterback that's not just kind of a game manager. I think Tyler Shuck's proven to be pretty good as long as they can keep him out there. He's a significant upgrade throwing the ball, for sure.
It's interesting the way like Matt asked that question of like, what do we know about Louisville? Because I felt that way about the game last year. Louisville had played more games. They'd beaten Georgia Tech, but I think the week before they had played at NC State and Jack Plummer looked awful.
Yeah.
And like, okay, well, Notre Dame they played well at Ohio State. They escaped Duke. Like, they should be fine. And they just got blitzed in the 4th quarter. So I'm interested in sort of like the more what Jeff Brohm wants to do angle of that with Louisville, because I mean, Notre Dame's strength is their secondary. They've been outstanding. So when you say it's more of what Brohm wants to do, like how different does the offense look, without Jawar Jordan, who was outstanding, but with Tyler Shuck and like more of a pass-friendly mentality?
Yeah, I think it took him like 2 weeks to realize we can't do the Purdue stuff here when Jack Plummer's the quarterback. And it was still a team that really, I think, had Scott Satterfield's DNA on it. They were a zone running team, and all the big plays through the air came from play action passing and bootleg and that sort of thing. And this year they far more, I think, so spread 3 and 4 wide receivers at a time. They're a lot more dangerous at tight end. Tight end was non-factor a year ago. And they've made a big upgrade there. And they're not running the ball nearly as well. Last week against Georgia Tech, is the worst running game they've had in years, and certainly the worst running game they've had since Jeff Brohm's been here. And they're throwing to set up running the ball and kind of in spots and taking a lot bigger shots. I mean, Ja'Cory Brooks and Chris Bell are a lot different than Jamari Thrash and Amari Huggins-Bruce. The guys are a little tinier, a little shiftier guys. Like, these are big, deep throw targets, and that's how they did everything last week against Georgia Tech. So I don't think you're going to see them come out and be like a zone running team at all. Like, they're going to air it out and try to just sort of run strategically, because they were also really good guard center guard a year ago, and Brian Hudson's gone now, and they're having to get a little bit creative because of that, because it's a little bit ragged up front for Louisville compared to a year ago.
Mark, I think the biggest surprise for me last year was defensively, just how dominant Louisville looked, at least that night against Notre Dame, forcing 5 turnovers. What are the strengths of this defense? And look, playing under the lights at home is a little bit different than going on the road during the day, but do they have the personnel in place to possibly replicate what they did last year?
Yeah, I think it's taken them a little while, but Jeff talked all fall camp about, like, this is the deepest of any team I've ever had in the secondary, and they absorbed some injuries last week, ended up playing 2 reserves at corner for like almost the entire second half when Quincy Riley went out, and they held up fine. They rotate a ton of guys up front. I know this happens. They were thrilled to get Ashton Gelati back, and talked a lot about playing him inside, because I think some of the NFL feedback he got was like, that might be kind of more of your future, but he's not been nearly as good inside. And last week in the second half, like, screw it, you're a defensive end again, and we're going to play, sort of pin our ears back and play that way. And it seems to settle them down a lot. But it's a defense that looks a lot like last year's defense. But I would say the strength of them is the secondary for Louisville as well right now. Depth-wise, last year they really missed MJ Griffin at safety. He's been back. And nevertheless, last week at the same time, there were some busts for the first time in a really long time against Georgia Tech. And if Notre Dame can do some of that same stuff, Louisville's going to have to hustle.
I mean, Gelati was outstanding against Notre Dame last year, and that was Joe Alt and Blake Fisher at offensive tackle. Now it's Emil Wagner and Anthony Knapp. So I guess, where is Gelati better? And I guess maybe it's a bigger picture question, but, like, how did they keep him?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I've asked him that kind of over the summer, and basically it was just like he didn't like what he heard from the NFL and he wanted to show more. And so, they're not going to try to talk him out of it, right? He's better outside. I don't know how well he translates to the NFL outside, and that's what I think he's sort of been balancing. But we went through this 10 years ago with a basketball player, Montrezl Harrell, a wonderful rebounder and angry dunker who was convinced that he should shoot threes if he came back, as the pros wanted to see that. And after about 6 games of, like, this is cute, get back where you belong, they kind of have done that with Ashton Gelati too. And it just makes them a lot more disruptive as a defense, trying to sort of find somebody else to replicate him outside.
Health-wise, where do you think this program is going into week 4? I know they had some injuries over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's good and bad. So they haven't had Colin Lacey all year, which is the South Alabama transfer that they just – you think about like a Rondale Moore kind of guy, or Wandale Robinson, not Wandale Robinson. Charlie Jones, like the guys in his offense at times that really feast in the slot. They were thrilled. They really thought he was going to be that, and he broke his collarbone a couple weeks before the season. I think he'll play in this one. He dressed last week. But Quincy Riley is like the best corner easily for Louisville. He is going to be a game time decision, got injured midway through the Georgia Tech game, but he'll be limited. And so, like, there are some wins to getting a couple of guys back like Lacey. And that should really open things up, I think, offensively. They'll be really excited about that. But defensively, they're beat up a little bit in the secondary for sure.
The series with Notre Dame, I'm not sure that I expected this to sort of be a rivalry or, something that turned into something when Notre Dame sort of did the ACC agreement in 2014. But, like, I feel like these games have been sneaky good. And I don't think the Notre Dame fan base kind of has a respect for how good these games have been. This is kind of one of those, you put it as a W in July when you look at the schedule. Like, how does Louisville feel about this series?
It means it's unique, I think, to a lot of Louisville fans, and it's as much cultural as it is football. Louisville is one generation into, like, trying to play serious big time football. And there are a lot of Catholics in Louisville who grew up Louisville and Notre Dame fans, Paul Hornung is from Louisville. Like there's a connection there. And Louisville has, I think, been aspirational. They have aspired to sort of be on Notre Dame's level for a long time. And so people here relish the opportunity to play this game and to be seen as peers and belong in this game. So it doesn't surprise me, Pete, that it seems like it means more to Louisville than it does to Notre Dame. Like that makes sense. And I think Louisville fans wouldn't even really take issue with that. And the games themselves have been good. They've been fun. Even in the COVID year, like it was gross, but it was super competitive. Right? Ian Book had the rushing touchdown in that game. Remember that? Whoa.
Yeah. And it's like, I mean, I even think about they opened Satterfield's first game was a night game. And like that, I think it was still Papa John's Stadium back then, but like it was a great crowd. I mean, I think the crowd really put Notre Dame on its heels.
First half.
The game last year down at Louisville was wild. So yeah, it's just, I feel like it's a sneaky good series that, probably doesn't get the respect that it deserves.
A lot of Louisville fans usually pick like one remotely reasonably kind of close road game to try and make a trip to. And it's definitely Notre Dame for this one. There will be a contingent. I know they return tickets, but there'll be Louisville fans there. There'll be more than at almost any other.
It's that or subscribe to Peacock. That's the ultimate sign of disrespect from Notre Dame to Louisville. You got to pay to watch this game. But no, I forgot about the 14 game as well in year one of the ACC partnership. I mean, these teams are 2-2 against each other. And you're right. This is Louisville's closest ACC rival, even though it's not an ACC rival. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I thought last year, I watched last year's game on TV, but I've been in that building. I was at the 2019 Notre Dame game that Pete mentioned. And watching it from afar and knowing what I know about that place and knowing what I know about Jeff Brohm, it felt cathartic for that program, that city, to have that showcase game against a brand name program and absolutely dominate them that night. I mean, what did that do? Not that Jeff Brohm needs any validation in that city, but what did that night do for the Jeff Brohm era at Louisville?
Yeah, it was a supercharge. It really did sort of validate. There've been not just the one annoying guy on Twitter that just replied to everything, bring Brohm home. Not just him, but there is like a whole population of people that are like, if we could just get Jeff Brohm to come back here, it would be like X. And like that game was what they were talking about. Full stadium, no doubt about you playing a team that you just can't question the validity of beating them. And the environment was as good as you'll have anywhere else. And that's what people had been expecting it to be like. And Louisville football has had one coach since like the 60s stay more than 5 years straight in a tower, and that's it. Like meanwhile, you've had two basketball coaches in Denny Crum and Rick Pitino that have like 70 years or whatever between the two of them without leaving. And it's been like, can we please just get one football guy who'll stay here? And people feel like it's going to be Jeff and it's going to be like this. So this game just sort of felt like that game a year ago, felt like validation, like everything, the big promises about what it would be like if Jeff actually came here. Oh, it's going to play out. It's going to look like that.
I mean, it's just hard to ignore Jack Harlow when he keeps tweeting, bring Brohm home. So I understand why that became a thing. But I mean, I guess I am interested, like Brohm, the fit is probably too perfect for him to leave. Is that kind of the perception right now?
I don't. We're jaded enough to know that like you should not say he'll never. But it's not a stepping stone. Like I think if he's successful and 6, 7, 8 years down the road, he gets a chance to coach either in the NFL or at Alabama or something like that. Like I don't think there'll be near the hard feelings there has been when Satterfield's interviewing after they go 4-8, or Bobby Petrino's interviewing at a place that hasn't even fired the coach yet, and Pat Forty's finding them at an airport in Indiana and stuff like that. Like that stuff is because it feels like, man, you don't even like it here. And all we want is one guy that just seems like he really likes it here. I think there's at least the faith that Jeff won't do that. And so I can see him staying here. I mean, he talks a lot about like, I know what this place means to people as just like people from here. He still lives in the same house he grew up here now as the coach. Like this is really home to him, but I'm not naive enough to think like he wouldn't like one more challenge somewhere, but I just don't think he's trying to parlay this into that.
How has, to go with a rivalry theme?
Yeah.
Notre Dame's never had a problem getting up for big games. It's and not to say Louisville wasn't a big game last year, but it was coming off a late win at Duke, coming off Ohio State. It was a perfect trip up spot for them. This is a program, at least under Marcus Freeman, that has gone up for big games and has overlooked opponents they probably shouldn't overlook. I don't see a scenario where Notre Dame overlooks Louisville this year, given what happened last year. Even Marcus Freeman, danced around that as much this week at his press conference. How's Louisville approach this game, knowing what they're capable of and knowing what they did to these guys last year, knowing that, in a weird way, Louisville might be the one with the target on its back coming into this game?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of those ones that you circled just because, look, whether it's even corresponds to how things are objectively, like beating Notre Dame just means a lot, and it means a lot to people here, especially. And it's been circled since the schedule came out. Like, it's one of the 3 or 4 games that matter. Kentucky and Notre Dame, probably Miami, Clemson, like those 4 are the most important games. It means the most. And Louisville is constantly sort of look at me, like most places that aren't blue bloods. And Notre Dame's a place you beat them, it gets people to look at you. It does. It's indisputable that win just means more to most people, and that more people are going to pay attention to it. And so it's as important a game as there is on the schedule for all the reasons we discussed.
Well, Mark, this is the last thing for me.
Sure.
If Louisville wins, and I feel like this game feels like much more, it should be like a 3-point spread, just like the home field makes a little bit of a difference than a 5-point spread. But
I agree with that.
If Louisville wins, like, what happened? Like, what do you think will be the reasons why?
Yeah, if Louisville wins, they were a lot more disciplined defensively than they've been against some of the running quarterbacks. I mean, I think if I'm Jeff Brohm, Riley Leonard is a really good runner. He presents very different challenges than Sam Hartman did. We love Sam Hartman. I joked that Louisville should retire Sam Hartman's jersey, like with what they did to him over the years. But Riley Leonard he presents the similar challenges, and Haynes King really ate him up last week. And even Jacksonville State's quarterback had 100 yards rushing, against them a couple of weeks ago. If they win, they got a much more consistent, disciplined defensive effort. Didn't let them turn broken passing plays into 17-yard runs, things like that, which is what Haynes King did a lot of. And they were at least able to keep Tyler Shough upright, giving him some time. Someone is going to get open. You hire Jeff Brohm to scheme guys open against teams that are even good at this. Like, that's the point of having him. But I think so much of this game, more than anything else, just comes down to Louisville not letting Riley Leonard kill them on the ground. And it's been a problem. If they do that, they will have done something they really haven't done all year.
I'll get you out here on this. The over-under here is anywhere between 47 and 48.5. Is there any chance this goes over? Like, based on everything I've seen from Notre Dame with my own 2 eyes, everything I've heard and seen from Louisville so far, I just don't see a whole lot of points coming in this game short of a couple pick sixes. Like, how is this not a low-scoring game?
Yeah, 1,000% agree with you. I think the only way that there's an overhit here is if there are special teams and turnover scores or super short fields kind of repeatedly. If Louisville's loose with the ball, quarterbacks are fumbling, that sort of thing in short fields, you'll get some points. But no, this seems like a very muscle it out field position kind of game. And Louisville's done all right, special teams wise, blocked a field goal, ran it back last week. I know Notre Dame's had both some highs and lows special teams wise, right? So far this year. But I'm with you, Matt, entirely. I would be stunned if this game is in the high 20s for both teams, for sure.
Awesome. He's Mark Ennis. You can listen to him on ESPN Louisville. He covers the Cardinals inside and out. A fellow Baldy. He's got a T-shirt coming his way, courtesy of Obvious Shirts. So thanks, as always, for joining us on The Independent, and we will see you down the road, buddy.
Anytime, guys.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks to Mark Ennis from ESPN Louisville for joining us to preview the matchup with the Cardinals. The first of 3 straight ACC games for Notre Dame in a span of 5 and 6. Yes, that's right. Louisville, Stanford, Georgia Tech break with Navy, then Florida State and Virginia. Irish wear a green game. Are they wearing green jerseys? Are they not? I don't know.
We still don't know.
It feels a little bit like the Bears celebrating so hard when they got a touchdown last week that they forgot they needed to go for 2 and they had to call a timeout and huddle. Like, this probably should have been thought of earlier, but I don't make these decisions.
Yeah, that's maybe for the best. But yeah, I thought that Mark's point about Haynes King eating up Louisville's defense last week was interesting, because to me, this is like, you need Riley Leonard to like take a pretty big step forward in this game. I believe Haynes King had 5 completions of 20 yards or more last week against Georgia Tech, or I'm sorry, against Louisville. So to me, that's sort of one of those things where, like, if you can get Riley Leonard to look a little bit more like the willing deep passer that he was last week, then I think Notre Dame will be fine. But if they try to play small ball against Louisville, it's difficult for me to see Notre Dame being comfortable. I could see them winning that way, but I think for them to look good doing it, like, you're going to need Riley Leonard to push the Louisville secondary, which might be a little. They're even if they're at full strength, they're still going to be banged up, and that's, you need Bo Collins, Chris Mitchell Evans to give you a little bit more. You need Riley Leonard to trust the fact that those guys can give you a little bit more this week.
I don't want to alarm anyone, but we have yet to bring up the fact that Riley Leonard did go to Louisville last year, and it was not pretty at all. It was the week after the Florida State game, I believe, which he left in the fourth quarter or third quarter with injury, and everything fell apart without him. But Louisville beat Duke last year pretty handily, 23-0. Riley Leonard was 9 of 23, 121 yards, no touchdowns, 1 INT, sacked 4 times, and had 13 net rushing yards in that game. Different circumstances, different venue, obviously different people around him on Duke than what he
different
has.
Ankle health.
Yeah, different everything. But you look at that box score, you look at the questions we have about Riley Leonard so far this season, and you see the opponent, and I can understand why there'd be a little bit of hesitancy going into this one. Now, this line has kept moving in Notre Dame's favor. It's anywhere between 6 and 6.5 right now. The over-unders anywhere between 45 and 45.5. You heard the interview. I'd be shocked if this goes over. Maybe I'm crazy. I think I'm 2-2 on the year against the spread. But I will go with Notre Dame to cover this one 24-17. Look, we're going to be having some form of conversation like this every single week, where we're really trying to thread a needle here and trying to predict what kind of team we're going to see every Saturday. But, I will say, if we've learned one thing about Notre Dame football under Marcus Freeman, it's that they do get up for big games. They can't ignore Louisville after what happened last year. Marcus Freeman admitted as much at his press conference this week. And look, Louisville might end up being really, really good, and I could look like an idiot here. There's so little to go off with them, that knowing what I know about the talent on both rosters, knowing that Notre Dame has a home field advantage, they've got revenge on their mind, that, they absolutely hear all the questions about them right now, even if that means running the ball down Louisville's throat. I just think as long as they don't turn it over, they're going to win this game. And I think that secondary is going to make life very, very difficult for Tyler Shaw.
I agree. Even though we don't know enough about Notre Dame, just in their unreliable sense, I think we know a ton about Notre Dame, but it's just not reliable information. I default to what makes the most sense. Notre Dame losing to Louisville at home and being 3-2 at the end of September. Meanwhile, Louisville is undefeated at the end of September. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The idea that Notre Dame is going to explode offensively, that is hard to get your head around as well. So I'm with you. I think I picked Miami to cover last week, and they barely did. I think Notre Dame will cover this one. So I'll go Notre Dame 28-17. That's not
it's a push on the over-under.
But I do think Louisville's going to have a hard time moving the ball, really hard time moving the ball. And Notre Dame, the Riley Leonard situation as a passer obviously is problematic. I do think that we don't give Leonard enough credit for how good he is as a runner. He is elite as a runner. I believe there was a PFF stat out there that he is the fifth ranked college football player in missed tackles forced. the other 4 are obviously running backs ahead of him. One of them, and number 1 is Jeremiah Love. So that part of Riley Leonard's game, I think, is still underrated, even though he's coming off back-to-back 100-yard rushing performances. We can sit here and say, like, hey, that's not a good thing that, like, your quarterback has to run for 100 yards. And I get it. I get that concern. But, like, that's just sort of – that's where Notre Dame is right now offensively. And I don't see that changing this weekend. And if they don't change it this weekend, if he runs for 100 yards and takes a few deep shots, then I think Notre Dame is a real pain in the butt to deal with. And that's an easy way to see them winning 28-17.
Yeah, I just think you can't sacrifice your strength right now. All the big picture questions we still have about this offense, they're going to need to answer them at some point this season. I think it's in everyone's best interest to push those questions back another week, try to fix some things over the bye. 2 weeks. Well, yeah, another game. Fix some things over the bye. And, do what you got to do to win this game, because it's going to be a dogfight. Every game so far this season outside of Purdue has been that way. And we spend a lot of time talking about what Riley Leonard isn't. And it's a valid discussion and there are valid questions. But to your point, the man is really, really good at running the football and wearing down defenses. And you cannot get away from that in a game of this magnitude.
Yeah, it's like if he was an above average runner, I think Notre Dame maybe makes a quarterback change, but he's not. He is a All-American runner as a quarterback, and that they've built the offense around that. You cannot pull the plug on that at this juncture.
No, I'm completely with you. That's all from us this week. I'll be at home Saturday. Pete, you'll be at the stadium, I believe. We'll see whether not you, but the players are wearing green jerseys or not. I will say they got them right last year. And granted, the moment, demanded that with Ohio State coming to town. Those green jerseys last year were really nice. The other ones never really did anything for me. You can't even tell the numbers when they're dark. When the numbers are white, those are very, very sharp. And you see the recruits posing in them more often than not when they get on campus as well. So we'll see. Sheamus will be there, I believe, the WWE wrestler. Second game this year, right? He was in Dublin for Georgia Tech, Florida State.
Yeah, he was, I think, the game day picker, if I'm not mistaken.
There you go.
I picked Georgia Tech, who was the only person.
Colt hero, Sheamus, will be back in the house for this one. Should be a fun one. Again, a lot riding on this game for both teams, particularly for Notre Dame. Pete and I both see a Notre Dame win and a cover. Apologies in advance for that kiss of death to Notre Dame fans. But thanks, as always, for joining us on The Independent. A reminder, you can subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe to our YouTube channel as well, and tune in with us post-game live and every Wednesday live as we talk about what's already been a pretty wacky Notre Dame football season in 2024. So he's Pete, I'm Matt, signing off from The Independent.